Hey, how's it going, folks? This is Hellbent, and welcome to AutoHotkey Game Maker tutorial number 8. In this one, we're going to carry on from what we done in episode 7, which was do all the setup and boring stuff to get it ready to create our snake simulator, which is basically like a snake game that introduces using a grid system for movement, collision detection using a grid system, introducing classes, etc., etc., all using graphics. So here we have an example of it where I have a snake, and the snake can grow, and it knows how to collide with different things. It moves around, and I can add multiples of them, and they know how to collide with each other. They know not to pass through each other, etc., etc. So we're going to continue on. In this episode, we're going to add in our class, so that way we can do all of the snake's code in. So let's jump into it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new class. So I'm going to say class, and I'm going to call my class snakes. Our class is going to be broken up into a bunch of different methods. The first method we're going to use is the new, which is going to be basically a way for us to construct our snake when we add a new one. The next method that we're going to add is I'm going to call update map array, and this one is going to take the position of our snake and update all of those values into our map array that we created during the first lesson. The next method I'm going to create is I'm going to create a method that's going to update the snake's position. So the snake is going to keep track of itself within a multi-dimensional object, or basically a multi-dimensional array that stores an X and a Y position. The next method I'm going to add is I'm going to call move snakes, which is just going to be each time in our game loop we're going to call this one, and it's going to decide what its next action is going to be, whether it needs to set a new direction or etc., etc. If our snake happens to get stuck for a certain amount of frames, what we're going to do is we're going to create a method that's going to allow it to reverse direction. If our snake needs to change direction, so we're going to set it up so that way it can randomly pick a new direction, or if it's blocked in a certain direction, then if it has a current direction, if it's moving up and then something gets in its way, we'll have it call up this method, which will set a new direction for it. The next method is going to be our snake needs to grow over time, so we're going to create a method that does the grow, or adds new segments to our snake. And the last one that we're going to have is draw snakes. Okay, so there's all the methods that we're going to be using to create our snake and move it and make it do everything that it needs to do. The first thing we'll do is we'll set it up so that way we can create our new snake. So what we'll do is we have this global snake object, and inside we'll use the number pad 1 hotkey that we set up in the first one, and we'll say that snake, and then we're going to be using an array of objects, so each snake is its own element within the array, or an object within the element in the array. And I'm going to say that snake dot length, or I'm going to look at how many snakes are currently in our snake array. Plus 1. So the next snake that I add is going to be the length of the snake. So to begin with, it has 0 snakes. So I'm going to say that snake length, which is 0 plus 1, is now a new snake. Or new snakes, which is our class. Okay, so we have a way of creating a new instance of our class. So let's go ahead and set up what it does when we call up that method, or create a new snake. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give our snake a position within our map, and we're going to use the grid sizing for it. So let's go ahead and set it up. So I'm going to set up a loop, and I'm going to set it to be an infinite loop. Now there's probably better ways of doing it, because if you have too many snakes on the screen and the screen's completely filled, it's going to stay in this infinite loop. So we should have a way of breaking out, like maybe check to see if it's run through a couple of times, and then check to see if there is actually any spaces left. But the simplicity, we'll do it this way. So we're going to create a random number, and this random number is going to represent the X position in our multidimensional grid array, and we're going to set it to a value of between 2 and the Windows width, floor divided by the width of our snake. Now this will give us, if we wanted our snake to start in the second grid space, the second grid space starts at 10 pixels over, because our snake is 10 pixels, each segment is 10 pixels wide. If we were to set it like this right now, if we were to pick if we were to pick the last segment, we would be outside of our screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to compensate by subtracting 1. So we can go between 2 and the right side of the screen minus 1, because that's going to be our border. So our border runs along the right side, the left side, the top, and the bottom. Now we need a Y. Once again, we're going to set it to between 2, the second position in our Y axis, and the Windows height, floor divided by 10 minus 1. And we're just going to keep looping this. We'll just keep looping this until the position that it picks doesn't have anything in it. So in our first one, we set up our map array to have a 1 if there's a wall and a 0 if there's nothing there. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep looping until the map for y comma x equals 0. So if it picks 2 random values and that spot in our map array has nothing in it, then we can break out of our loop and continue on. If not, go ahead and loop over again, pick 2 new random numbers, and check it against our map to see if it's empty. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple of brushes. So I'm going to say this dot brush 1, and I'm going to use 2 different brushes, one for the body, one for the head. So I'm going to say brush 1, and this is going to be for its head, and I'm going to set it to be equal to a new brush, which is one of the functions I introduced in the last one. And what color are we going to be passing it to it is I'm going to pass to it the first color in my colors object. So I'm going to pass colors 1. Now I'm going to create a brush for the body. So I'm going to say this dot brush 2 is equal to a new brush. And the color that I'm going to use is I'm going to use that variable that I created up here, color count, which is set to 2. So the first brush is going to be for the head of the snake, and then I have 9 other colors to use for the body. So I can pick a random, well, it's not going to be random, but it's going to be a sequence. So I'm going to say that brush 2, its color is going to be, colors, color count, and then after that I'm going to increment color count up 1, so that way the next time I create a new snake it'll have the third color in the element. So I'm going to just say if I add 1 to color count and it equals 11, then reset color count back to 2. So if I've added 10 snakes, go ahead and reset colors count back to 2, so that way if the next one I add will be back to the beginning colors. The next thing, now I'm going to implement this, but we're not going to implement it in a full way. What we're going to do is we're going to set it up so that way we can decide how many body segments the snake has by hard coding it in here. And this will just be for testing purposes to begin with, but later on we're not going to be setting it up so that way it actually is testing each of the positions of the body. So the head and all the body segments, when they update into the map array, they're going to change the value from a 0 to a 2. What we've done to begin with is we've only checked, to create our new snake, we've only checked 1 position. So if we have a snake with 2 segments, the body segment for that snake isn't going to check to see if there's already an object in there. So if there was an object already in there, another snake already in there, it's still going to add it even though it shouldn't. It's not going to cause us any problems, but it's not something that we want to have implemented in the long run, unless in our picking random positions we set it up to check the full length of the snake that we're going to be adding. So I'm just going to set it up to loop 1 to begin with, and then for testing purposes, if I want, I can update this. So what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to create a object that's going to keep track of the position of all the body segments. So I'm going to say that this dot snake array, so I'm going to create an array, which is actually going to be an object, but it's going to be an array of objects. So a index, so in this case it's going to be the first snake element, or the head, or it's going to be index 1. This will be 1 because we're only looping through it once. So this is going to be where our head is, and it's going to equal an object that has an X position and a Y position. And what are we going to use to store in here is we're going to use the position that we set from our random numbers, or that we got from our random numbers. So we're going to say X is equal to X and Y is equal to Y. So we got our X and Y from our random numbers. We're going to plug this into our snake array. And then what we're going to do I might need to touch up on this after. But next thing I'm going to do is now that I've created my snake's head, I'm going to update its position into our map array. So I'm going to say map, and now I need its the Y position of the map and the X position of the map, which happens to be this dot snake a index, this dot snake array, a index, dot y, and then its x position is this dot snake array, a index, dot x. Okay, and we're going to set that to a value of 2. So a 2 is going to represent a place that our snake is in our map array. So if it's a 1, it means it's a wall. If it's a 2, it means it's a snake. And if it's a 0, it means that there's nothing there. I think we can break out of this now. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the width of the snake and the height of the snake. Now we're going to be using the same one all throughout it, so it's not really a big deal, but if you want to code it so that way you can change it later on to maybe 20 pixels by 20 pixels, 30 pixels by 30 pixels, you can just change this setting. So I'm going to say this dot width is equal to 10 pixels, this dot height equals 10 pixels. I'm going to create a couple of variables. One variable is I'm going to create a counting variable that I'm going to increment later on, so that way after a certain number of frames or a certain number of things happen, our snake is automatically going to change directions, so it doesn't have to wait till it hits something. It can change directions on its own. And I'm going to call this this dot changer, and I'm going to set it an initial value of 0, and then we'll increment it later on in one of our methods. I'm also going to create another counting variable that I'm going to call this dot growing, and this is going to be another counting variable where if it matches up with some number, it means that our snake has a chance of growing a new body segment. Next, I'm going to set a random number for how long it's going to take until it can grow the first time, or it has the opportunity to grow the first time. So I'm going to create a random number, and I'm going to call it ng for next grow. And I'm going to set it to a value of, let's say, 10 to 50. Then I'm going to add this to my snake object. So this ng colon equals ng. Next, I'm going to do the same thing with our change direction. So I'm going to create another random number. And I'm going to call this no, I'm just gonna hard code. I'm gonna hard code. I don't want a random. I'll use a random number later. What I'm gonna say is this dot change at, and I'm gonna set it to 30. So after 30 frames, if our snake hasn't already changed directions, then we're gonna change its direction. And then after that, we're going to use a random number generator too, so that way it's got different values throughout it. But the first time after 30 frames, automatically it'll definitely move if it hasn't already. Next, I guess I'll create a random direction that our snake is going to start in. So just like in the previous tutorials, if the snake is moving up, it has a direction of 1. If it's moving right, it has a direction of 2. If it's moving down, it has a direction of 3. And if it's moving to the left, it has a direction of 4. So I'm just going to create a random number to set its first direction. And this is going to be direction, and it has a value between 1 and 4. And then I'm going to say that this dot direction is equal to that random number direction. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create another counting variable, and this one is going to count how many frames that our snake is stuck. and I'm going to initialize it at 0, so that way if our snake constantly has a situation where it can't move, we're going to set it up so that way it can change its direction, so that basically its head becomes its tail and its tail becomes its head. Okay, I think this is enough for this video. I'll try to keep them shorter, a little bit shorter, so we'll continue on in the next one where we'll set up all the movement and everything like that. But I think we have, no we don't have enough to draw it yet. We'll do that in the next episode. Anyways, peace. I'll see you guys on the next one.